Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay. We're live.
We are live. Hello. I'm assuming I'm going to give everyone a few minutes, not a few minutes, a few moments just to trickle in here before we get started. Maybe about 5 seconds. For everyone joining us today, if you're joining us from the Northern Hemisphere, happy first day of summer. It's the summer solstice today. And if you're in the North and Southern Hemisphere, it is your shortest day of sunshine today. So welcome, listeners. Thank you for joining us today. Today's session is the kickoff of a 4-part speaker series celebrating Patty's 10 years of our Women in Diving initiative. I can't imagine a better way to celebrate both summer and women than with our esteemed guest today, Dawn Kernagis. With a history of absolutely jaw-dropping accomplishments, Dawn has distinguished herself as a trailblazer in diving and beyond. Her innovative spirit and collaborative approach, which you will see that she's applied to her work, has led to groundbreaking achievements and undoubtedly has opened up doors to what is, I think, very unique opportunities that we will learn more about today. So I'm going to read Dawn's bio before we officially welcome her here because I could not do it justice and there's no way I could. It's basically could take, I think, Dawn 2 Wikipedia pages to read this whole thing. So Dr. Dawn Kernagis is a biomedical researcher and has been a diver, including cave, technical, and free diving since 1993. Dawn is currently the Director of Scientific Research at DEEP, which we will also talk about shortly, an organization evolving how humans live, work, and conduct science undersea. She is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of North Carolina and a visiting scientist at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. Her research, funded by the U.S. Department of Defense, NASA, and other organizations, has been focused on developing ways to protect the brain and nervous system of humans working in extreme environments. That's why we talked about her as the extreme environments legend. Dawn completed her PhD and postdoctoral training at Duke University. She completed her PhD as ONR Undersea Medicine's first pre-doctoral award recipient. At Duke, Dawn also assisted with numerous DoD and NASA-funded projects focused on extreme environment physiology. Can't wait to dive more into that. Dawn has been a diver and leader with numerous underwater exploration, research, and conservation projects around the world since 1993, including the deep underwater exploration of Wakulla Springs and surrounding caves for over a decade. In 2016, she was selected as a crew member for NASA's undersea mission NEMO. Based on her underwater exploration, mentorship, and research experience in the diving community, she's been inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame and as a fellow of the Explorers Club. Outside of research, Dawn currently co-hosts an award-winning science and technology podcast, STEM Talk. Don't forget, let's remind you to share about that at the end so you can let people know how to find that one. And she's also a board member for the Women Divers Hall of Fame. So please join me in welcoming extreme exposure legend, Dawn Kernagis. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for having me.
It is an absolute honor to welcome you today and to have you here, especially this kickoff for our speaker series and just in general, just because it's been, I think, a long time coming that we've really wanted to host you and learn more about your awesome career as a diver and beyond. You've truly already left an indelible mark on the world, but I feel like if I said saying that to you, your response would be, "I'm just getting started."
Yeah, that, and I'm surrounded by people who are doing just such amazing things that I'm like, oh, like there's just so much more to be done. Yeah, just at the beginning.
We'll cover that because I feel like because you say you got your dream job recently, that means why I feel like you just feel like there's so much more to do. But before we get to that, because we have a lot of ground to cover, I think it's always good to start at the beginning. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit more about where you're calling in from today? And I think that's a model, a replica of the USS Enterprise behind you, is what you. So can you tell us a little bit more about just your background and what's going on with where you are today?
In my surrounding environment. So as we talk about environment, so this is my home office in North Carolina. So Apex, North Carolina is just outside of the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area. And my home office behind me, I have a replica or a model of the USS Enterprise that my father actually built from scratch. So he got the original blueprints and molded and created every single piece of this model. It's just incredible. And so I like to pay homage to it in some of these calls where, we're doing work that would relate back to the military and also different types of environments in the ocean itself. So so I'd love to have this in the background and just representing that influence that my dad had and my parents had on my childhood as I move into the meetings and move into the work that I'm doing.
That is incredible that he
Yeah.
did that from scratch. That is
Yeah.
very impressive. Wow, and that really is truly a piece of artwork that you have there. So good thing it's encased in a piece of glass.
That he built. He built the whole thing. So even the glass, and it was going to be put into the museum, the Naval Aviation
Uh-huh.
Museum
Yeah,
in Pensacola, Florida. And we made the decision to keep it within the family just to make sure that it was protected and it went to where we wanted it to go. But there's some pretty amazing figures in military history who have had the chance to see it and were just awestruck. So I think my father, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, I think he would have really I
I'm
think
very
he would have been
proud.
humbled for those people to know that they saw his model.
You can give tours at your house of
Yeah.
them. Well, speaking of your parents, I know that they've played an immense role in your life and in your career and where you are today. And what struck me just from getting to know you over the past couple weeks is how important your family and your relationships are in your life and getting you where you are today. And so we go back to the beginning. It's your parents, I think, that they bought you your scuba certification for your birthday, but let's kind of talk about how you got to that point and what inspired you even before you decided to get certified. Where did that exposure to diving even come from? And I guess the ocean.
Yeah, great question. So my parents had taken me to the ocean when I was younger, probably about 4 years old, to the Pacific Ocean. We moved from Iowa to North Carolina when I was about 8, and we went down to the ocean for the first time on the Atlantic side of things. And I just fell in love with the ocean. And we went to the Pine Knoll Shores Museum Aquarium down there, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a marine biologist. I want to work in an aquarium. I want to just immerse myself in everything related to underwater life and diving. I knew I wanted to be a scientist. I was interested in geology and archaeology. I just have everything just interested me back then, and still does, to be fair. So I said, this is what I want to do, and so I said I want to learn how to scuba dive, and started reading all the scuba magazines. I asked for the Jacques Cousteau books, so Ocean World and I think it's Whales and Dolphins from my
Remember?
for Christmas very shortly thereafter.
Hmm.
But I got them for Christmas and carried them around with me everywhere. So I joked that I was training to be a scuba diver, carrying something heavy on my back. And I have a picture, actually, the first picture that I'd like to share with you guys. Yeah, so this is actually a trip that I did. I thought I was so cool. That was me on the left. That's my little sister in the middle, and that's my best friend growing up, Tyler. My dad was a very brave soul and took the three of us down to the Florida Keys. And it was my first time doing like an official snorkel / dive trip. I considered it a diving trip in my mind because I wasn't certified yet. And you can leave the picture if you want, or if you want to kind of, check out. But so we learned how to put on wetsuits. So key skill set when you're a scuba diver. There are pictures of that I'm not sharing. Because we were just wiggling in, it looked so uncomfortable. But I just fell in love with it. Just, we went to John Pennekamp State Park, got a chance to snorkel around
Hmm.
there and see fish. And I was like, yep, it just solidified what I wanted to do.
That's
Yeah.
funny. That was probably my first snorkeling experience too. My parents took us there. I think I was about the same age as you. I was probably about 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah. It's a great place to introduce somebody. I mean,
It is.
just, there's so much life there and just so easy to access. So that was a really cool experience. And then, as I moved along, as you mentioned, I got certified when I was 15 years old and pretty much lived in the scuba shop at that point. They couldn't get rid of me. So I don't think I was officially old enough to work, but I was working for air fills and classes and gear and discounts on everything. And eventually got into cave diving. There's a kind of a backstory to that, and then technical diving. So this is actually a picture of me just kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I was 17 years old in this picture, and I was doing my first rebreather dive at 40 Fathom Grotto in Florida, and this was the Prism rebreather, and had a chance to do a course down there, and just absolutely passionate. I did not go to high school prom. I was cave diving that weekend. um,
That's
but
commitment.
yeah, it's just something that I was absolutely passionate about. And once I was given that leash, run with things, I absolutely did. And it was just very cool because my parents and the people around me really supported me in that journey, and
Mhm.
trusted me to make the right decisions, trusted the people around me who were training me. And yeah, it's just, I'm very, very lucky to have had that support.
Yeah, that's huge because, and let's dive into it a little bit more because between the age 15 and 19, your experience, like your trajectory in becoming a real like expert cave diver is, and then moving on into your 20s is pretty incredible. And for our listeners here that might find that, and what you just said is, I think the support around you to get you to enable to not only like your parents letting you do that, because there's definitely a stigma and a little bit of fear
Yeah.
sometimes when we think about cave diving. And that's one of the first questions I actually wanted to ask you is like, did you ever have a fear of that you had to overcome in just thinking of cave diving or getting into that space, going on a rebreather, especially back in the 90s, going on a rebreather? Because I would say the technology has advanced a little bit since the 90s on rebreathers, but how, what did you ever have a fear, or were you just
Yeah.
so excited to just go?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't have a fear, it's not healthy. You probably
Yeah.
shouldn't be doing it, to be fair. So it's a healthy fear, but it's also acknowledgement of, you know, going through the proper training, repeating
Mhm.
the skill sets over and over again, going through your checklist before the dive. I'm just doing all the things that really, that fear, the healthy fear, makes you, kind of keeps you doing the right things and being a proper diver and proper teammate as well on the diving side of things. And yeah, my parents, when I first brought it up to them that I wanted to learn how to cave dive, they pretty much, my dad interviewed the potential instructors, and got a feel for who these people were that his young daughter was going to be training with. But I'm just really thankful that my parents saw that it was something that I was truly passionate about, and said, we're going to support this, even if it may not make them comfortable. And there's probably a large amount of fear, probably even more so on their side of things than on mine.
Did you originally know you wanted to go into like technical diving, or was it kind of situational because you had a lot of cave divers around you and like the area that you lived in, and then you ventured down into Florida later? But was that an aspiration, or do you think it just kind of
Yeah.
was something you took advantage of the
Yeah.
opportunity?
Yeah. So I first started off wreck diving. So North Carolina, just amazing wreck diving off the coast of North Carolina, and just love that. And by the way, I also spent a ton of time in the local rock quarry diving as well. I just wanted to be underwater, so that I was just happy to be underwater. But our dive shop, Bill's Scuba in Raleigh, North Carolina, back in the day, they used to run trips about once every month or 2 months down to the Florida Springs. And so they drive down and spend a long weekend and hit lots of springs doing open water dives, maybe some like restricted cavern dives, and then they come back. And so my diving instructor ran, my open water instructor, who's just phenomenal, took me on one of those trips. My dad and my sister actually went with me for that trip. And so my little sister was snorkeling around the springs while I was scuba diving.
Uh-huh.
And we went to Ginny Springs, and it was Ginny Cavern, where, we went through, and I will tell you, my instructor was a cave diver as well. And, so he stepped me through everything properly, even for a very, relatively safe cavern dive, and stepped me through all the protocol and equipment and everything else, and said, okay, this is, how we're going to go in. So we went in and did the first cavern dive. And I remember swimming down in that gin clear water and swam up to
Mhm.
the grate. For any of the listeners who've ever been to Ginny Springs and been into the cavern, there's a really significant flow that tends to come through that grate. And, I just remember going up to the grate and be like, I want to see what's past this. And then just the feeling of being in the cave, it's just the beauty of the lights on the limestone walls, and the clear water. It was just amazing. So I came out, and that was what drove me into learning how to cave dive. And you said expert cave diver. I mean, I never considered myself an expert cave diver. I was surrounded by experts, but what I did do is started to identify opportunities where I could learn from the best, and the
Mhm.
people who were, really setting the standards and doing things correctly, and learn from them pretty much from a very early stage in my diving career.
Would you say that at that time, like when you were doing all that in high school, were you one of the younger and female probably, but younger and female divers doing that kind of thing at that time?
Yes, yes, and yes, at that time for sure. There, even on the female side of things, there weren't a lot of us back then. I
Mhm.
think this is 1994, 95 when I got started, 94 when I first got started, and so, but there were amazing women doing just incredible, incredible dives who we would look up to. And I remember, this is largely pre-internet, or just as the internet was kind of getting wound up, and we had CompuServe email lists where you get updates and AOL. But so
Yeah.
you would get the updates on what people were doing through sometimes newsletters, but mainly through the diving conferences. So the National Academy of Cave Diving, National Association of Cave Divers, and then the National Speleological Society cave diving section had their annual meetings. And we would go to those, and then you'd hear all the amazing things that people were doing and just sit awestruck at, the amazing dives that people were doing. And yeah, there were a handful of women that were really setting records and doing some incredible things back then, just like the men.
So before we move on to later, I think we have to, you continued your cave diving, like I guess even your training, and you continued to work on these really, what I heard was, diving projects all around the world. You were really, really expanding your purview and doing more and more projects. And can you tell us more about what you were doing at this time before you went on to your next journey, which was grad school?
Yeah, so I ended up did a fair bit of cave diving and got to a point where I started to get invited to certain cave diving projects. And so one, for example, was down in Mexico. And actually, there were some things that happened, and I didn't stay all the way through that one project, but that was for a cave system called Nahotchnacheech. And then we did some sump diving exploration in the U.S. and in the Ozarks back then. And then I translated over to a group. So I'd heard a lot of things about this group called the Woodville Karst Plain Project, WKPP. And they were a group of cave divers who were just really pushing the limits when it came to underwater cave exploration, the equipment that was required. The caves were deep. So for the listeners, I'm talking like 250, 300 feet in depth average for these cave systems. So the divers weren't diving deep just to dive deep. They were diving deep because they had to, because the caves kind of forced them to go deep as they're exploring them. And so there's this whole evolution that was taking place with the WKPP in particular, really pushing those limits. And there are other groups that were doing the same. But I was really drawn to the team and their style and how they were, again, just kind of pushing things along. So I ended up having the opportunity to go down and carry tanks and essentially be an intern with the team for a little bit. And they said, we'd like for you to join us. And so I ended up becoming a support diver for them. I was not doing the big push exploration dives. I was supporting the big exploration dives. But then I also ended up becoming operations manager, surface manager. So when we were doing the really big exploration dives, that sometimes we had 50 divers on site rotating in the water, in and out of the water, people doing 7-hour 300-foot dives, and then
You were overseeing these teams of
overseeing all
divers,
that.
right?
So I had the chance to oversee all that, overseeing the equipment, that the divers that were moving in and out. That's the most important piece, but also the equipment and the nutrition, and just tracking all that information, and then handling any emergencies as they came up during those dives. And so I did that for just over a decade. And so that was just an incredible experience to work with just all kinds of people from around the world. So we had people that would come to us from around the world and dive with us and support the divers and push some of the different cave systems. And this is all located in North Florida. Actually, I have a picture of the map system. So these are all caves that are just south of Tallahassee, Florida. And so our team did a lot of work in pushing those cave systems and mapping them and connecting them and setting world records on a regular basis, actually. So it was just an incredible opportunity to be a part of.
The cave system, what's in blue, is that what we're looking at there?
Yeah, the cave system in blue. Yeah, absolutely. And so down on the bottom, that's just as an example of one of our divers. So we would have multiple scooters because you had to have backup scooters in case and then we'd have scooters that were placed further in the cave for emergency purposes. If a scooter, died further back in the cave, you want to make sure that you could also get out safely. You had all these different gases for the cave exploration itself, but then also for the decompression piece of things. Again, we're talking really deep dives. So we were diving trimix, we were diving different types of breathing gases all the way up during decompression. And by the way, the team is really working with researchers to figure out what that decompression looked like. So this is all just cutting edge approaches, technology, all of it, all the equipment that you see, a lot of that kind of grew out of that team. If you dive a harness and a backplate, for example, now, that largely grew out of the type of diving that we were doing and kind of invented with our team with the Woodville Karst Plain project back in the 90s. So it's pretty cool to be a part of that. And then topside, that is me, very young me, checking on one of our exploration divers before he went in for a dive and just making sure that he had everything, everything was correct as he was doing his pre-dive checks and before he went underwater. So
And what was the purpose of, like, why were you guys doing this? What was the purpose of this project in general, and like bringing all these divers together and exploring these caves, this cave system?
yeah, so great question. So big piece is mapping it out to understand where the groundwater is, where the groundwater goes. That's for protection of the aquifer system, that groundwater system.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also biology that was taking place, hydrology taking place. There's a lot of science that was also taking place as part of this. And we also had a big outreach component when we did these dives. So we would be on site at a state park, for example, and we would talk to individuals, visitors to the park. We would talk to reporters. We had a lot of media coverage. And so there's a lot of outreach with what we were doing as well, just bringing that awareness to the groundwater systems and the aquifer systems in Florida, which are so important.
Are these type of projects going on today? And is this like a possible career path for divers, especially tech divers, to get involved in still, especially when we're talking about groundwater and the like the amount of the challenges we're having, even with water scarcity and supply these days? Is this something that's still, maybe in demand? Just curious.
Absolutely. So Woodville Karst Plane Project still exists today, and they're still
Oh,
pushing the limits and still doing amazing work, which is just incredible to see. There's also Karst Underwater Research, KUR, which is in Florida as well, and they also they collaborate a fair bit with WKPP now, which is really awesome. But yeah, there are a lot of organizations out there that are doing this type of work. And by the way, not just in the US, there's a lot of similar work that's taking place around the world that individuals could get involved in. I will note this is all volunteer. So we would spend, depending on the conditions. So if the springs were clear and they weren't overrun with what we would say flooding, I mean, they're already underwater, but essentially if the river levels rise enough, the water gets really dark and it actually can reverse flow in the caves. So that can be dangerous. So we would have times where we wouldn't dive as much. But if we were really diving, sometimes it would be a couple weekends a month that we would all come down from all around the country at the very least, and sometimes around the world to come together to dive these systems. So it was pretty amazing. So I was doing that while I was in college.
That's
And just a side note, so WKPP also did other exploration around the world. So we went to Mexico for some exploration when I was working with them.
Uh-huh.
And then out of WKPP, an organization called Global Underwater Explorers was born. And they still exist to this day as a technical diving training organization. And I was their first operations manager when they started in 1999. And so I was able to work on some global projects as well through GUE and kind of as part of a member of the WKPP.
Wow, that's okay. So you're harnessing, you're really honing in and building this amazing skill set in operations and team management, which is going to come into play down the road for sure. We're going to talk about that. But you've mentioned a couple times like pushing the limits on equipment and gear, and like especially at that time. And there's been a lot of evolutions into and the gear as far as cave diving and the technology and how we dive that came out of this time period. But what you became really interested to is like the physiological impacts of like on divers, and I think also on how we apply dive medicine, which really kicked off what you started doing late from then on, and what you were going to do with your the grad program. So can you tell us more about, you left that part, you left cave diving a little bit, and then you moved over to do what?
Yeah, just trying to figure out what I knew I wanted to do research. So, I kind of dabbled in a lot of things. And then just working with these projects, we had the chance to work with researchers. So I got the chance to do a little bit of field work and just help with a little bit of sampling and talk to scientists. I wasn't a scientist per se yet.
Yeah.
And just by the way, I did do some other research as an undergrad that had nothing to do with cave diving. It was marine biology research. But anyway, long story short, I knew I wanted to get into research. I was like, but it would just be amazing if they had a program focused on diving physiology and how to protect divers. But at the time, as I was digging around, the only programs, the formal programs that were out there were dive medicine programs. So you had to go through and do your MD, then you could do the research. And that just wasn't necessarily my interest at the time. And so I remember a mentor of mine, he was at NC State, at North Carolina State University, I was talking to him about all this. He's like, you can do whatever you put your mind to. And I was like, yeah. I said, well, I can't find anything that's a good fit. This is what I want to do. He said, well, make it, create it. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, huh. So I had some ideas around research. So I was interested in looking at uh, how diving and specifically decompression affects how our bodies respond at, like, all the different systems in our bodies respond. So the immune system, the inflammatory system, the coagulation system, go down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up coming up with an idea of how to measure that efficiently in divers. And I took it to Dr. Richard Moon, who's at Duke University. He's a legend in dive medicine and diving physiology. And I said, and just as an aside, I was also one of his participants for a lot of his studies because I lived here in North Carolina. And so they
Uh-huh.
would run diving studies all the time here. And so I said, I've got this idea. I and he said, I remember just shaking. I was so nervous taking this idea to him. I was like, he's going to think this is stupid. By the way, he's not that kind of guy at all. I was just really nervous about it.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so he said, he said, I think this is great. You need to find funding to do this research. I was like, okay, how do you do that? And so he said, well, there's a funding opportunity that's coming up from the Navy. There's a proposal deadline. And here's a sample proposal that I've put together for a very different type of research, but just to give you an idea of what you need to include. And so I ended up writing what's called a pre-proposal or a white paper. So it's just kind of the initial shorter version of what you're pitching. And it ended up getting invited for a full proposal and got funded. And so as it got funded, I ended up talking to, or as they were in the process of making a decision for it being funded, one of the conversations that came up with the Office of Naval Research, who was funding this study, was if I did this study, I would like to turn it into a graduate project. And one of the things that they recognized was there was going to be a gap over time between these legendary dive medicine and dive physiology experts and kind of a hole left behind because there weren't a lot of young people in the field. And so they recognized this need to build up the workforce in undersea medicine. And so they ended up funding it with the idea I would do my PhD and stay in diving medicine and stay in diving physiology research. And there was no guarantee to that per se, but just, that was the hope. But they would fund that, and I would be the first graduate student for Office of Naval Research Undersea Medicine to do a project as a student. So I'm very thankful that Elizabeth Montcalm Smith and Matthew Swergas in particular, that they really believed in me and gave me that opportunity to prove myself out.
So essentially, just for the audience, you basically created an official program for other students and other people now to continue this great work, and continue research for dive medicine.
Yeah. So a number of others have now followed that same path, and so they're always kind of joking around with me, like, no pressure, but you better keep doing a great job. So, but no, it's been really cool to see other graduate students now going through that program with that funding and proving that could be a mechanism to getting new people into the field.
Is that kind of, would you say, like a hub for dive medicine research now?
Yeah. So as far as Office of Naval Research or
That program that you created, like that.
so it's not
Yeah.
really it's not really a program, but it's just more of a, like, we're going to open this up and say, yes, we will fund
Okay.
pre-doctoral or graduate students in the process. So I would say the Office of Naval Research Undersea Medicine is absolutely a hub for that kind of research, and they really fund a good portion of the undersea medicine research that takes place out there.
So what happened after you completed your graduate program?
Yeah, so finished my graduate program. And just by the way, if anybody ever reaches out, I will tell you there's always bumps along the way. I don't know anyone who smoothly went through a graduate program. It wasn't anything bad. It's just there was like what they call a continuing resolution with the US government. So funds were kind of held. So I had to get creative with how to get my data. And there's just always this interesting process. But you learn how to persevere and be resilient in those environments. And I think that helps you be a better researcher downstream.
How long did all of that take you? Just to put in perspective.
So just under 4 years. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, just under 4 years for my PhD program. But the way I see it is I was a full-time student who I was like, I have funding. I have a job to do, so I was ready to get in and get out. And I was really lucky that I had a project going in the door with that with the university.
Were you diving at that time as well?
A little bit. So it's kind of funny. Actually, my biggest opportunity to dive was in the spring. So every May, all 4 years of my graduate program, or I guess 4 years, because I did it after I finished after I graduated.
Uh-huh.
I had the opportunity to work with Divers Alert Network.
Uh-huh.
So Neil Pollock, Dr. Neil Pollock, was a mentor of mine through Duke University and through Divers Alert Network. And he was running field studies on technical divers. So he was doing monitoring of bubbles in technical divers after their very, very deep long dives at an event called Inner Space. So Inner Space is where rebreather divers go down to Grand Cayman and do deep rebreather dives every day, essentially. So it's like, if they're going to choose to do that, we should collect data and
Yeah,
samples on them.
that's
So
cool.
yeah, so I had the opportunity to go down every month. And so I got diving in just about every day around the data collection time point. So my colleagues in grad school would laugh at me. They're like, "How did you get this job, like this project where you get to go to Grand Cayman and and work with divers?" And I was like,
Every
"I mean, we
year.
all pick our projects, yeah, yeah." So very lucky.
So that set you up for, did you know at that time, like when you were doing your graduate studies, did you know what you wanted to do next, or did
No.
another opportunity? Okay. Okay.
Well, to be honest, I actually was considering going to medical school, but for family and personal reasons, I ended up making the decision to not go to medical school and to pursue a postdoctoral opportunity at Duke University. So I was in the Department of Neurology. So I moved from Department of Pathology for my PhD to the Department of Neurology for my postdoc, and working with a lot of the same people.
Hmm.
And we started studying ways to protect the brain for patient populations. And there's a lot of crossover and lessons learned in that research to protecting the brain and nervous system for healthy people who are in extreme environments. And so I was able to keep doing the research I was doing kind of off to the side
Hmm.
as I was doing my postdoctoral research at Duke.
Can you define for this audience what an extreme environment is?
That's a great question. So essentially, any place where you have conditional changes that affect your physiology and potentially can induce risk for an individual to either be hurt or to have some kind of chronic impact. So that's probably the best way to describe it. So when I say extreme environments that I've worked with,
Hmm.
undersea is definitely one. High altitude is another. So thinking about low oxygen at altitude. And then
So,
also,
so anybody climbing at like, 14,000 feet or doing
yes,
some high altitude climbing and would qualify there, I'm assuming.
absolutely, absolutely. And then space is the last one. So and there's a lot of different things that happen in space, both short term and long term, that affect the body. And there's some shared things that happen in astronauts in certain conditions that also affect divers. So there are a lot of lessons learned between those two research communities. So
Because we have such a large diving audience, where would be the cutoff for an extreme environment being in the water? Like at what depth would you is that a thing? Like
I
once you
think
get
as
to a
soon
certain
as you go,
atmosphere
yeah, as soon as you go underwater, right? As soon as you go
or
underwater, you have the impact of immersion, which in and of itself affects the body. It's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it has an impact on your
Mhm.
body's physiology. And then obviously, when you start scuba diving, you always have that risk of things like decompression sickness, and you're breathing higher pressure oxygen and all the things that take place. So I would say, I mean, any scuba dive, we consider that an extreme environment.
So just to kind of connect back to when you were like cave diving a lot and you were talking about pushing limits, and then you did your studies in this area, what did you hope to, like, what kind of outcome did you want to achieve with, what you were trying to learn, and then what were you trying to provide maybe a solution for through these studies, through like helping people in these conditions or these environments, like as far as like, was it increasing people's performance, was it allowing them to dive longer, like what was the actual outcome, just to like put it in more, I guess like layman's speak of like
Mhm.
for the listeners that are following with us today.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I should have addressed this earlier too, as I was making that transition to graduate school. And I said that I wanted to do research in this space. A lot of that was born out of working with, being friends with and teammates with individuals who are pushing the limits, right? And so I was like, how can we better protect our teammates? How can we help them work to the best of their ability when they're doing those deep dives or those really, really long dives? And so essentially it's all of the above. It's, how to help them perform at their best, but also keep them as healthy as possible in those environments and minimize the risk of things like decompression sickness and oxygen toxicity, and or things that just happen to you over longer dives, for example.
Your work though is also applicable to just clinical situations, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover. Just looking at nutrition strategies, optimizing sleep for brain health in particular. So that really became kind of my area of focus, was optimizing brain health more than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so things, to be honest, they're things that are important for us every day. It's not just in extreme environments or in the clinical setting. Sleep. And that was a big area of my research before I moved into my current position. And I find it fascinating. I do not practice what I preach. So yeah, I definitely can research it, but I'm not very good at practicing what we know. So
I have to get that a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. But we're learning more and more about how important those things are. Just for your overall health, which of course is going to impact how well you perform in those environments, and then also just increase your safety in those environments.
Okay, so we need to keep moving here.
Yeah.
to cover. So this next chapter is, so you were invited to be part of NEMO 21.
Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners what NEMO is and who sponsors it? What is that program and what is the purpose of that program? And, that's really, I think, the intersection of your research career and your dive operations leadership coming together, your invitation to NEMO, the NASA project. So can you paint us a picture of what that was every day for you and what it looked like.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if you want to, I see her clicking through the pictures. So I'm sorry, I forgot that I had the pictures down there. But if you want to, so that was just me at Duke University helping with the study that Dr. Richard Moon was running. And then the next picture is going to be a picture from NEMO that actually Patty's Carl Shreves took. And so he's taken all the legendary photos. Every NEMO mission has a picture like this of all of the dive team members outside of the port that's in the kitchen area. And so it was awesome to be a part of that. I'm the one who's awkwardly second down on the left. I'm like trying to get into technical diving position, but I'm supposed to be getting into a position for a photo. And I'm not a good underwater model in that context. When you want me to get out of it, technical diving position is fine, but anything outside of that, I get really awkward. So NEMO was incredible. So I moved from Duke University doing my postdoc to a place called the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. So we'll just call it IHMC. So this is an academic research institution that focuses on human in the loop, and they wanted to build out a program focused on human performance and health in extreme environments. And so they recruited me down there to build this program, which is just such an incredible opportunity. Dr. Ken Ford is the director there, and he still is a mentor to me and gave me this incredible opportunity. So I'm at IHMC, and Dr. Ford is incredibly well connected with folks. And so there's actually a Navy meeting that we were conducting, looking at crossover between, I think it was NASA and Navy were sponsoring it, looking at crossover between undersea medicine and space medicine research and performance and everything else. And I ended up meeting an individual named Bill Todd. So Bill essentially is the founder and is the person who runs the NEMO missions since 2000. And he works for NASA full time and just had this incredible vision for using an undersea scenario or undersea, what we call analog environment for training and testing that's related to space flight. And so Bill was at this meeting. We started chatting about some ideas around research that I wanted to do for the Navy. And as we move forward, a few months later, we're talking about the research, and he said, "Hey, do you have time to chat?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So he and another mentor of mine, Tim Broderick, called me. And Tim was a former NEMO aquanaut and worked with us on a lot of different projects. So they called me and they said, "Well, what are you thinking about for diving?" I'll never forget this conversation. I will remember how everything looked like when this conversation happened. So he said, "What are you thinking about for diving?" I said, "Well, I'll scrub the bottom of boats if you want." Like, I didn't even think diving was an option. I thought I was just going to hand sampling materials off to crew members and just be there to get the samples back. And he said, "Well, we're thinking about having you as a crew member. What do you think?" And I remember they just kept talking like about how amazing it'll be. And I was like, "Yeah, you don't have to convince me. I'm on board. That would be incredible." So they invited me to be a crew member on this mission unexpectedly. So I'm just honored that they gave me that opportunity. It was a life-changing opportunity. And if you want to kind of click through to the next photo, just so individuals can see another picture. So what's really cool about the NEMA missions is we do science inside the habitat. So we live in this undersea habitat that's at 62 feet on the bottom, but we're living at about 45 feet of seawater. It's off of the coast of the Florida Keys. So for our listeners, if you've been driving through the Florida Keys and go through Isla Morada, on the right-hand side, heading south to Key West, there's a building. It's a bright yellow building. It says FIU, I think it says Medina Aquarius Reef Base, and that's the shore base that supports the habitat that's offshore. It's about 6 miles, just short of, about 5.5 miles offshore from that shore base. And again, so the habitat is sitting on the bottom, and individuals go in there and live at pressure. So after 24 hours, we're in saturation. So that's where your blood and tissues are saturated with the nitrogen in that environment. But what's cool about that is once you get into saturation, you can go out and do diving excursions essentially as long as you want. So we were doing excursions outside of the habitat for 6 to 8 hours, doing work outside of the habitat. And then you just have one long decompression at the end. So our mission had 2 back-to-back 8-day saturations at 50 feet. And then we had one long decompression that was about 16 hours, and it was overnight. So you get a lot of work done in saturation.
What kind of work are you doing? I'm sure so many people are like, when you say work, what are you doing?
Yeah, a lot of science. Yeah, mostly science. So right here, we're actually building coral trees. So we're building out a coral nursery that was at about 100 feet of depth. And so just thinking about the work that goes into building a coral nursery, if any of our listeners have been a part of those restoration efforts, it's amazing. Amazing work. This is I think this is our favorite project actually of the whole mission, because we're really giving back, and so it's a cool opportunity to do that. So we were working with the Coral Restoration Foundation and building these deep coral trees. And so you see the little placards on there, those are the coral seedlings. And then they sit and just pick up the nutrients and are allowed to grow over the course of however long they deem. But I think for this mission, it was 1 year that they grew. And then the next mission came back and harvested those plaques. And then they use that harvested coral they replant it. And they plant it in areas where the coral's been decimated and really try to give those coral ecosystems a chance to survive. So that was just a really cool opportunity.
Right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this kind of work is taking place all around the world, and you can do it as an open circuit scuba diver. You do not have to be in saturation to do this. It's just at 100 feet, they were taking advantage of us being able to just be out there for 6 hours to build these trees and get as much work done as possible.
Were you doing any of your own work there, like research projects that you were personally vested in, or were you performing or part of projects that just supporting other projects that were already like on the docket to get done while you were?
Both. Yeah. Okay. So I had a project where we were collecting certain types of biological specimens from the crew for looking at changes over the course of the mission. Mm-hmm. So I did that. And then, it was like 25 projects that we had going over the mission. So if you think about International Space Station, how the astronauts are always they have a full docket of projects that they work on, it was a very similar setup. And so with our mission, I didn't mention this, but we did have several astronauts who were crew with us. So we had 6 crew members total for our mission, and then 2 habitat technicians that were living in the habitat with us and making sure that we stayed alive and didn't do anything stupid. But we had 2 NASA astronauts. So Reed Wiseman, who is actually getting ready to be the commander for Artemis 2. So he's the commander for Artemis 2, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And then our co-commander was Megan MacArthur-Benkin. And Megan she just flew a recent SpaceX mission, and she flew a shuttle mission not too long, like back in the day. She flew a shuttle mission where she actually operated the Hubble telescope, or operated the arm that repaired the Hubble telescope. And so people are like, oh, these are the hands that fixed the Hubble telescope. But the leadership across the 2 of them was just incredible. Wow. And then we had a European Space Agency astronaut, Matthias Maurer, who just recently flew as well. So, and then we had 2 other researchers who were crew members, Noel DeToy and Mark Agrifa, and just incredible humans. It was just a really cool opportunity. We're still all friends to this day. We still all message to this day. So that was a really, really cool opportunity to merge my diving background. So I got to really get back in heavy into the diving side of things and revisit what it's like to be part of an operational diving team with the science. So it's just really a neat opportunity to merge all that together.
Well, thanks for painting that picture for everyone, because I think
Yeah.
that that just shows the kind of caliber person that is down there, and just testament to why you were part of that mission as well. So
Thank you.
congratulations, and that's really incredible. It's no accident then that you ended up being invited to the astronaut selection process not too long ago.
Yeah.
I have to give you a shout out there. Do you want to talk about that experience with our
Yeah.
audience?
Yeah, and I'm looking at the time, so I'll keep it quick. And just if
Okay.
you want to click through, I think there's one or two, there are a few more pictures related to Nemo. That was some processing samples in the habitat. So we also did research in the habitat. So yeah, in 2020, okay, that's good. So that's actually my last institute. You can probably click out of the
We
picture
talk
now.
about email for an hour. So
Yeah, I know. I could. That's a whole other presentation that I give. That's like easily an hour presentation plus questions. So it was cool. So in 2020, they opened up. So about every 4 years or so, NASA opens up a selection process for astronaut candidates. And so they put out a call. Anybody who there's a number of different requirements, but typically U.S. citizen, and there's some other requirements in there like master's degree that you can then apply to become an astronaut. And during 2020. It was March of 2020 when the opportunity opened. They ended up having over 12,000 applicants that round. Typically, they're allowed to select like between 10 and 15 individuals. Some classes have been bigger, some just a little bit smaller.
uh-huh.
So then you go through this process. It's kind of funny because then the pandemic was hitting kind of around the same time. So it became a little bit more of a drawn out process just because of the pandemic. It just slowed everything down. And so they go through and they do a number of different evaluations of your application. They do, I think they whittle it down, then talk to your references, talk to other individuals that may know you, and then they down select to 120 people. And so I got the call on my birthday, actually, in 2021. I got the call on my birthday. It was just such a great, I was like, you have no idea how great you just made my birthday, is what I told the astronaut office. So they were like, yeah, this is how we're going to schedule this. So in May, I went for my first round interview. That was mostly a little bit of medical testing and some other types of testing that they did for a couple of days. And then you wait. But through this whole process, you just meet the most amazing human beings, like who are just so accomplished and just is so humbling. So I got the call in July of 2021 that I had made it to the final round of selection. So they had down selected now to the final 30. Mm-hmm. And that was over a week time at Johnson Space Center, full-scale medical testing, like all the testing you can imagine that they would want to do for somebody who they are thinking about becoming an astronaut. But it was just a really cool way to kind of pull back into and talk about like my experiences working in a team environment, working in an extreme environment, and that all kind of came back together through the interview process. So I was humbled to be a part of that opportunity for sure. Like that was another life-changing experience for me, for sure.
I'm sure there's listeners out that are wondering, like, what was the hardest part of that process of like the testing? Because there's physical and like there's like psychological testing and like physical testing, correct? Is there different types of tests? So you don't have to give us details. I know there's probably
I was gonna say we can't give too many details, but just big picture, I'll say, I mean, you're going through this place where you're digging into your history, who you are, why you do what you do. So it's not just a job interview. I mean, it's like a very intensive psychological,
right?
Yeah. And so it was very, like everybody I talked to who went through the process, it was just this incredibly insightful process of like, who am I? Why do I do what I do? What drives me? Because you get asked a lot of questions are kind of around that. And so you really like dig in. And you have people who are also evaluating that from the outside. So it was just incredible. And I wouldn't say it was hard. It was just, I don't think I've ever been through anything, that intense on the psychological side of things. So just really, really digging in. But it gave me a good perspective of what I wanted and what was important to me. And I think everybody else that went through that final selection process felt the same way. So they do an incredible job of, vetting individuals and just making sure that the people that they're selecting are absolutely going to be, incredible crew members and team members as they move forward with really complex missions. So yeah, it was cool to be a part of that.
Well, as fate would have it, that did not work out as you've maybe planned or non-planned.
Yeah.
But what did happen, the saying of, when one door closes, another one opens, couldn't be more applicable, because you ended up a year later, unknowing at the time that you would land in your dream job.
Yeah.
And want to spend as much time here as we can talking about your role at Deep and why this is your dream job, and just talking about this incredible. So you're helping them establish. I love this. Humanity's permanent presence in the ocean, and and you will help them. What do I have here? To make humans aquatic.
Yeah.
And I think, what is that? What does it mean to make humans aquatic? And how is all your years of research and what you've worked on so far culminating in this incredible experience that you're calling your dream job?
Yeah, yes, it's a dream job, absolutely. So if you think about me talking about that habitat experience that I had with the NEMA mission being a life-changing opportunity, a life-changing experience, now I get to pull off of that everything that I loved about that and make it into something where we're building that out, not just for one habitat in the Florida Keys. We want to see subsea habitats everywhere. We want to increase the access to the ocean, not just for scientists, but for other individuals. They can get their eyes beneath the ocean and really see, what it's about, what's happening subsea. And so we're in the business of building subsea habitats, the submersibles that would allow for crew delivery and also materials delivery and transfer. And then also, what's cool is not just the technology, but we're also working on development of the diver training that goes into that, the dive medicine, the human performance, to make sure that individuals stay as safe as possible in those environments as well and can operate to the best of their ability in those environments. So it's just this amazing opportunity to work. Essentially, we kind of think of ourselves, or I like to think of us as like a subsea NASA/SpaceX. So we're not necessarily a government agency, but we're an organization that is looking at this sustained presence in an extreme environment from all different facets. So it's really exciting to be a part of.
And Deep has a term for this astronaut of the sea, of the ocean, called the Aquan.
Aquans. Yeah, the Aquans.
So cool.
Aquanaut would be.
How do you become an Aquan? How can someone listening today say, "Oh, I want to be"? And it's deep.com, right? It's pretty.
Yeah, deep.com. Yeah, please check us out. So deep.com, you'll see amazing. Our media and graphics team and design teams are just so incredible about putting together these beautiful renderings. But I will point out that we're not just in the rendering phase. We are, several years in, 100 people plus deep. We have a lot of exciting things coming up on the horizon, and it's not just the graphics, it's not just the renderings, but we're really moving this forward, which is really exciting. So you can become an Aquan. I was talking about that training process that you would be involved in, and it's going to depend on somebody's background and how much diving they've done in the past and what their certifications are in the past. And again, we're in the process of developing that out, but we would have a specific training program to take you could go all the way from never having been diving in your life to commanding an undersea habitat and crew doing rebreather dives outside the habitat. Now that's the widest spectrum that you can think of in our training, but there's a lot that falls in between and all that. And obviously there's a lot of time that would go into some of that scenario. That's a pretty extreme scenario. But I love that. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say what's a little more accessible. I would say it's a little more accessible, I think, than, not everyone. It's so, like you were saying, like to be an astronaut, 12,000 people, you were so lucky to get down to the top 30. Yeah. Would you say that like this is maybe giving humans a little more opportunity to almost be like an astronaut, but to be an Aquan, to have that, maybe to actualize and realize that dream of underwater, of being part of this incredible opportunity, like this incredible experience of this new system that we're trying to establish underwater. It's so cool.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of it too, right? Is that we want to increase that accessibility. So it shouldn't just be for somebody who gets down selected from 12,000 people to 10 in the final class, or it shouldn't just be for people who have billions of dollars and can pay for it. But we really want to make this so it's a regular thing. It's so commonplace to be able to go subsea and live in an undersea habitat, and so accessible that anyone can do it. With the right training and everything else, and the right, really increasing that access. And we really think that's important for ocean conservation in the future. Once I think everybody here on the call who's a diver, you get it. We want to protect our oceans because we see it firsthand. We're undersea, we see it when we go underwater. And there aren't, not everybody has that opportunity. So if we can increase that accessibility, is something that's really, that's a really big driver for us.
I'm glad you touched on that too, because there's going to be research projects that are applied to like what you're talking about earlier, as far as like the physiological aspect, dive medicine, things like that. But there's also going to be conservation projects happening in the system as well, correct?
Yeah. Correct, absolutely. And so there are projects related to the human themselves and the diving medicine and human performance piece there, and also the diver systems. There will be science related to the habitat itself, so development of the life support systems and keeping that environment internally as safe as possible, and testing out devices that might be able to use for biomedical monitoring or things along those lines. And then there's going to be science related to marine science and conservation. So that will be allowing divers or allowing aquans to go outside of the habitat and do excursions where they can do those 6 to 8 hours of excursions out and get so much more work done than you would in a traditional scuba dive. And so that's one of the major benefits of saturation diving, which I was talking about earlier.
That's so cool. I hope one day that I get to dive there with you.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
So what would you say for, like, those people listening, especially like the younger generations that are looking at, like, listening to this story saying, oh my gosh, Nemo, NASA, astronaut, or being an astronaut, being part of Deep, being an Aquan, it's like that's a common question, obviously, when speaking to someone that like you that's just done incredible work. Like what would your advice be to those people? And I definitely want you to touch on the importance. This has been a theme like throughout the entire hour we've spoke today, is like the importance of building relationships and mentor, and you've said so many times, this person's my mentor, this person's my mentor. And I think maybe some people don't understand what that means. Like, how do I get a mentor? Like, I don't have a mentor. Do I need one to go be an astronaut, or how do I form that relationship? So I think this idea of establishing relationships and mentors has been a huge part of your journey. And would you kind of focus on that as advice you would give to a young person that's starting their career in diving or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, look to the people who are doing what it is that you want to do. And it doesn't have to be exact. It could be that they have, an amazing skill set, or just the way they carry themselves. So it may not be exactly the same job, but it's just the way that they present themselves, the way they interact with others, the way they, do their job may be something that you would want to look for in a mentor. I don't know anyone that wouldn't help somebody out in the next, like where I'm at my career. I consider myself kind of mid-career, mid-career onwards, and even earlier than that. I don't know anyone who wouldn't take the time to help somebody and mentor someone who's asking for it. So I would say, if you identify those individuals, reach out to them and say, hey, this is what I want to do, or maybe I'm not quite sure what I want to do, but I really, like the fact that you work this way, or that you carry yourself this way. Can you give me some advice? And then a lot of times over time, that will develop into, those conversations will develop into a sustained mentorship. I wouldn't be where I am today without my mentors. I'd always try to make a point to give a shout out to all those people who not just believed in me, but like continue to mentor me. I still reach out to them for advice when I'm making decisions, or just when things are going really well, and say, hey, I just want to give you an update and say thank you for for the backing that you gave me along the way. So so seek out that mentorship, and just maintaining those relationships, not just for mentors, but also colleagues. So your peers, it's really important, because there's a lot of interesting work that has spun off now based off of peers that I had back in my diving career days, and then in my research career days. And now we're finding ways to collaborate, which is awesome. So just maintaining those relationships is so important.
And one more question, as far as you've led so many teams. And you even mentioned in a recent interview that even when you're diving, you're usually with a team. Like sometimes people with their dive buddy, or some people even dive solo, but you are often, you're always surrounded by people. You're doing projects. What is a critical component of having a successful team?
That's a great question. I think the best teams out there are comprised of individuals who can be either a leader or a follower. So if you tend to have just one person who leads all the time, sometimes there are dynamics that come into play that may not be necessarily the healthiest for the team. So I think if comprised of teams where when needed, or when you're tackling something where it's an area of expertise for an individual on the team, they take the lead, but then they're also completely comfortable taking a step back and being a team member to somebody else's leadership. I think that's where you see the best teams form. And to be fair, I'm taking that from NASA, because I know that that's something that they look for.
Okay.
That's something that's really important to them. But I mean, it comes up in a lot of conversations that we have, even for military and for other types of settings where that's really critical that you have that balance in individuals.
And my last question for you is, if you could be any sea animal, what would you be?
Oh boy. I love,
Did NASA not ask you that question?
no, they did not ask me that question. I love dolphins. I mean, it's just so cliche, but I just like since I was a little kid, like I was part of the Jacques Cousteau
Uh-huh.
Cetacean Awareness Program, and like would look for them, and I never saw them. Now I see them, all the time down at the coast. But my dad
Uh-huh.
would actually take me to the coast to count them and look for them. We never saw them. Now we see them all the time. Um, but I will tell you really quick, I just had this amazing experience in Baja, Mexico. I went out with a group called Latitude Encounters, and we had the opportunity. We were out in the water. There were a bunch of dolphins. I was like, this is amazing. You can hear the dolphins. And we had a blue whale swim by us. I can't say I would want to be a blue whale. They're just so like, but it was so majestic. But watching the dolphins play with the blue whale,
Oh,
I was like, they're having fun. They're having a really good time. So I think that
great.
would be my desire.
That's to swim with the blue whale as a dolphin.
It was amazing. Yeah, yeah. That would be. I said it was the pinnacle as a human, but if I could be
Yeah,
the dolphin with that blue whale, that would be it. So yeah,
that's why we dive. Those are the best stories.
yeah.
Well, this has been I wish we had more time. This has been so incredible speaking with you and getting to know you better and sharing your story with our audience.
Thank you.
I just want to leave two things with the audience today. Well, first of all, did you want to leave anything else with the audience today?
I think that's it. No, this is fantastic. I think we covered like the full
We
trajectory.
did a
So
good job.
yeah,
So I just wanted to leave these two things with the audience. Women's Dive Day is July 20th, third Saturday in July every year. This is our 10-year anniversary. So thanks to our PADI dive operators and dive centers and resorts around the world that are hosting this event this year. It's so exciting that this is continuing, and we're getting more women into the ocean, more people into the ocean to celebrate the underwater world. And join us on our next speaker series is July 9th with Stephanie Gondula from Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuaries. And Dawn is smiling because she just happened to meet Stephanie a week ago, or see her again. So it was a coincidence, not planned. So which is incredible, and faith that I'm speaking with both of these incredible ladies. So I hope you join us for the next one. Dawn, thank you so much. It's just been an honor. Just thank you for inspiring all of us and keep up the great work. Look forward to hearing more about DEEP in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you to everyone here.
Bye.
Bye.